Oh, yeah. What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and it's time to get, funky fresh with the Bo Daddy.
Good morning. Top of the morning to you.
It is a morning. It's more of your morning than my morning.
It's still, the sun has not come up here yet in the mountain time zone.
Yeah. Well,
Although I have a cup of sunshine here.
I have my multiple cup of sunshine, though it is in my Theology Beer Camp mug. Which, look, was I a little frustrated that I had to spend $12 more per person on glassware so there was a potential lid at camp this past year? Perhaps. Is the fact that it is also an exceptional coffee mug, doesn't leak and hold temperature all day like a perk? Yeah. So I'm just really hoping that the 650 people that have these very expensive glasses I bought at Theology Beer Camp are using them on the reg like myself.
They were quite a nice perk, I will say. I know that at the Airbnb that I stayed at, they were enjoyed greatly.
Yeah. Bo, I don't know how maybe I forgot this or I just learned it, that you freaked out some people in your Airbnb. And this came up as we were discussing, like, oh, who's going to communicate what to different people this coming year for Theology Beer Camp? How are we going to do housing? What do we communicate to the podcasters? How do we talk about blah, 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 blah? And Kristen's like, yeah, we don't want to end up freaking your buddy Bo out again. And I was like, I thought your buddy's Bo, which is her boyfriend's name.
Really?
But it's like the other spelling of Bo.
Yeah, the southern spelling.
And I always think of that spelling as the French one.
Oh, yeah. For most people, it's a nickname, Beau.
Mm-hmm.
But I was born on a dairy farm, and I don't think my parents expected me to be super bright, and so they gave me just Bo. And I got to tell you, Tripp,
they just gave you Bo. That's the only kind of Bo they got at a farm.
I got to tell you, when I was in grade school, in those early years, I was the first in my class to be able to spell my name.
Game on.
Yeah, man. And furthermore, it's the last time that I was ever the head of the class. I never got back there.
Really?
I peaked early, man.
You peaked early?
Yeah.
Oh, is that just because in undergrad you were too edgy for your teachers, so they were like, we're giving Bo an A-. Yes. They were like, he's so edgy. He positively footnoted Brian McLaren. We're concerned.
Well, oh my gosh, I have some hilarious stories. But wait,
I want you to, okay, so here's what I want to hear, your version of this story.
Of the Airbnb story?
So for people that don't know, at Theology Beer Camp, which if you go to theologybeer.camp, you can sign up now, because next week you'll get an email saying the location and everything, and there'll be 1 week you can get tickets the cheapest if you get the email. So theologybeer.camp. But at it, there's like 30-some PhDs. People have been on Homebrewed and all the other podcasts that come, 30-some God pods, and
amazing,
all sorts of mayhem that takes place. Well, ever since I started it, the first year, January 2017, I was like, basically, I thought I was going to get 30 people to come to LA, rent 2 church vans, essentially, like I would do for youth trips. And we were going to go to the different breweries in LA, and a different theologian was going to meet us at each one. This is what I thought. And I go, there's no way I can sell 30 tickets. I'm just going to get half of them to be my friends that have other podcasts. So I did.
Yeah.
Then we sell a whole lot more tickets. So it's like 150 people there. Then I have to invent an event, because I thought we're traveling to breweries, and I'm not, no one wants to rent a van to move around Los Angeles in as part of your trip.
I did it many times as a youth pastor. It is not the best.
No, not good. So we basically have to come up with the event because too many people came, all these podcasters coming, and I'm like, well, let's just save money. I just rent 2 Airbnbs that were next to each other, and we all hung out in them.
Oh.
And so that's how it started.
Oh.
But now there's a lot of podcasters. It's turned into a whole ordeal. And it's not like all of them are even in my phone. And there's way too much to organize at Theology Beer Camp for me to even keep up with it well. So let's just say there was a series of miscommunications as to who was sleeping where and stuff this past year.
Yep.
And so you pick it up from there. So
all
you
right.
know that this year will be 9. So like, you know,
okay.
9 years ago this habit started, which has led to lots of people with expectations as to how it works. And we just lacked communication.
All right. So I get there and I'm hanging out with Grace, Jisun Kim, Adam Clark, and Mike Morrell. And just great conversation, and it's really going well in that first evening. And I look at the schedule, and the first night there was a cosplay competition, which, you know, isn't necessarily my thing. And
Last year it wasn't. Just saying. Just saying, we got time to plan.
All right. And then it was karaoke, also not my bag necessarily. So I meet your team, and Kristen is just absolutely amazing, just on top of everything. But there's so many people asking her questions, and she remained calm through the whole thing. But I could tell that the logistics may not have been airtight, okay, on who was sleeping where. So Grace and Adam had flown from the East Coast, and they were very tired. Oh, and Mike too, but they were all very tired. And they wanted to go back to their Airbnb. Now, keep in mind, I thought I was staying at of the 3 Airbnbs, I thought that I was staying at the Quiet House because as a older attendee of this magical gathering, I could tell that I was one of the senior fellows. And so I thought I was going to stay at the Quiet House, which fits my style, right?
You're more of a soar with the eagles than a ride with the wolves type of guy. That's how my grandpa put it.
Come on, that's funny.
He's like, at a certain age, you got to decide which one you do.
Yep.
Do you soar with the eagles or do you ride with the wolves? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you can't be a morning person and a late night person after you have children. And
that is so funny. So Grace and Adam both wanted to go back to their places, and Mike had a car, and he just was so gracious. I mean, I love Mike Morrell. He has just an amazingly generous heart. And so he volunteered to drive us all back to our places. And here's my logic. I'm probably not going to sing karaoke. I don't have a costume for the cosplay. I'll just go back to the Airbnb and stake out my bed to make sure that I get a bed, because my fear was that, hold on, there it is. I want to make sure that I get a bed, because I had heard that there was a bunk room in one of the Airbnbs, and as
all the comic book podcasters, that's their preference.
Yeah. So as a single guy, this isn't my first time. This isn't my first rodeo, and I know that the chances of me being on a couch in the main area, also because I snore, and especially after some ale, the chances of me being in the main area on a couch or in the bunk room, I knew was quite high, and it never ends well because my snoring annoys people. So I decide I'm going to go back early to the Airbnb and just put my stuff down and just have a quiet evening and blah, blah, blah. So first stop is Grace's. But I thought I was also staying there. So I carry her stuff up to the front door. And then when I go back to the car to get my stuff, Mike's already closed up the trunk. And I said, I need to get my stuff. And he says, you're not staying here. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, Kristen said you're staying at the podcast one. And I was like, oh, all right. Sounds fun. So I get in. Mike drives me over there, drops me off. I'm the first one there. We punch in the code. I get in. And some people had already put their stuff in some of the beds. So I go downstairs, and there's lots of rooms downstairs, but one is a corner room. It has a pretty small bed, and I put my stuff in there, and I ordered dinner, and I have some ales, and Bo goes to bed at 9 o'clock on the nose. I go to bed 9 o'clock every night because I get up at 3 or 4.
I understand. You like to soar the eagles.
Yeah.
You're an eagle soarer.
So I get in there and I lock the door because like I said, between my youth pastor days and road trips, I know how this stuff works.
Hey, look, it's better than finding out that we're in a double bed together.
Yes. Well, that has happened many times as well. So
talk about a choo-choo train.
So I do the math and I figure out the reason I lock the door is I figure out these folks are going to get home from karaoke at like 11 or midnight. And somebody's just going to barge into this room. And sure enough, I'm dead asleep. I mean, out to the world. And somebody is banging on my door trying to get in because they had just gotten back from karaoke. And obviously everyone's like tired and ready for bed. But they couldn't figure out who was sleeping where. And so in my, groggy voice, we're having a conversation through the door because there were some married couples there who they asked me what size was my bed. And I was like, it's small. And, but no one knew who I was. And because I had been off the podcast for 6 years, literally no one knew who I was.
They're like, you're on the podcast with Tripp.
Right. So the next morning, I'm up before everyone else. And literally everyone who was a part of that, when they came up to the kitchen to get coffee, was like, are you the guy in the corner room? And I said, yeah. And they're like, are you sure you're supposed to be here? I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely supposed to be here. Kristen told me that. And but I found out on a final day, I didn't know any of this, but I found out on the final day, they said, we've grown to like you over these last 3 or 4 days. But, the first day you really freaked us out. And
apparently they were like, should we call the cops? Is there like a squatter in the God Pod house? Is there a God Pod squatter?
So, we have this exchange. I'm out and I'm not unlocking the door and I'm not even open to moving rooms. And so they had to have like a conference about who was going to sleep where. And
it
was pretty funny. Yeah.
Well, part of it, originally you were going to stay over in this other house right next door where I was. And the bed was it was one of those, we added this bed because it's an Airbnb.
Yeah.
And the mattress is not made for someone over 150 pounds.
Oh, gosh.
And I was like, I don't know. I don't want him like sitting there looking at me like, my back is screwed up, Tripp. You put me on blah, 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 blah. Tony Jones complained about his Airbnb for like a year once when he had he and Dan Koch from You Have Permission were in this house with all of our friends, except the others were either females running things or married couples. So they had the real beds. Mm-hmm. And then Dan and Tony were in this bunk bed room of like an IKEA bed for small children, bunk bed. And after the first night, they're like, Tripp, we're going to get a hotel. And they just would keep bringing it up.
That was my backup
plan. If that happened with Bo, you'd bring it up every week. You're like, oh, you're working on plans for beer camp. Can I request a mattress more than 2 inches thick?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is,
I don't want it kind of like pre-wrapped as if they're anticipating someone to wet the bed. Like I want a bed where they go, an adult is using it. Okay.
The other thing is because I'm close to 3 bills when I step on the scale. I do test the compression of every mattress that I'm on, and so I appreciate your sensitivity to that because I've been put on temporary beds or makeshift situations But if you're close to 300 pounds and you're a roller, I roll a lot, you will test the limits of any temporary mattress.
Yeah. What I've started doing, because I have slept in all sorts of places, especially early years before, like when you would go speak somewhere and it was mostly hoping you don't lose money and you're just saying yes. I've slept in a lot of weird places. And so when what I do, because we don't have like we have like one room that can be a guest room if we're gonna have a bunch of people and stuff. I buy nice single mattresses, and there's 2 nice single mattresses in storage, and then I get them out, and then just there's plenty of space to stick them on the floor in my room, because I would always rather have that than some bed that had never imagined an adult might use it, because it just ruins the next day. You're like hanging out and you just, oh wait, picking up my coffee, my back was just like, I hate you, and you're like, oh, let me tie my shoes. Never mind, I think I'm comfortable with it untied until I'm on a couch and can angle correctly, because my back hurts, because I slept on a glorified blanket with rods underneath it. Anyway,
well, the other thing is, because I'm so tall, my feet either hang over the end of most mattresses, or I'm pressing up against a footboard, and so I have to sleep at an angle.
Yeah, man, this is an old man podcast now.
This is an old man conversation.
Well, so 2 things, and I can't remember exactly what we're talking about, but I'm sure I know what I'll say. So, Lori last week, brought up cigars, so that inspired me to come out here, and also the Taylor, and we have like good weather. Taylor Thomas from Till It Today had the Till It Today podcast, who they were the facilitator for the process. Tillich Theology Nerd Stage event. I had Will Rose and Nick Polk on their podcast, to which they called me the Joe Rogan of progressive Christian podcasts, and I was so upset. No, I don't want. That means I could like slippery slope from endorsing Bernie to being at a Trump inauguration. So I took it personally. So now I'm wondering if Will's just going to screenshot me smoking a cigar on a podcast and be like, "Told you," but started way before Joe Rogan.
That's
smoke cigars on a podcast. But if I win the lottery, I'm going to build a standalone office just so I can smoke cigars while I record podcasts.
Wow, that's quite a dream you have.
Yeah. So, all right, now what are we talking about?
Space, but not like the galaxy.
Oh yeah, the thing I sent you.
yeah, the thing you sent me. So I hope everyone has their thinking caps on today, because this is one of the more intriguing new theories I have ever encountered. When we do theology trips, a lot of what we do is based in the past, and we try and bring it into the present and anticipate the future. This thing that you are getting into is fully set in the present moment, and it honestly, this is some pretty adventurous theoretical scholarship. So I hope everybody has their thinking caps on.
So, okay, you can tell me now if you think this would be fun.
Okay.
I have a first draft of like a 1,500 word like blog post about it that I wrote,
really?
like trying to introduce it in a, without all the words that probably showed up in whatever I sent you. That you're like, huh? And why it matters for theologians that care about solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
I could just read it and then you talk to me about it.
Okay.
Because I don't really know how I would introduce it.
Yeah.
Except that I spent a long time.
Would you then post the 1,500 word blog?
Yeah, after you give me suggestions. Because
okay. All right.
No, just because in my head this is a high quality introduction to the new colonialism, doesn't mean it is. You're a lot better at coming up with ways of pitching nerdy ideas to normies,
I appreciate it. Man, that's a high compliment. I appreciate that. Hey, as a total side note, yesterday at this time, the sun was up, and I'm looking outside right now, and it is pitch black, and I don't know if that's because of the storm clouds or what the heck.
The rapture.
I got to tell you, it's freaking me out a little bit. It's weird.
Well, I saw a Twitter thread, Skeet thread. I think that's what they call blue sky tweets.
Okay.
But remember, we wanted to call them blueies. Because don't you think people our age hear the word skeet and think of something inappropriate from
a little bit, yeah,
early 2000s rap song that, I don't want to get kicked off YouTube if I explained it. But why do you call a blue sky skeets? I know you shoot skeet with a gun,
right?
Target practice, and then there's the not appropriate version of.
Yeah, I don't know. But I'm not on blue sky.
But I know, but blue sky is the place people that didn't want to support Elon escaped to, and they were like, let's call our individual post a word that is either used in kind of a hyper masculine patriarchal sex act, or shooting something with a gun. See, I just feel like there was a branding problem.
Yeah, that seems short-sighted.
I'm passing on a joke. Okay, so, all right. Do you want to just interrupt me if you have ideas, or do you want me just to read it?
Yeah, if you pause from time to time, if you have paragraph breaks, or I'll raise my hand or something.
Okay, this will be fun.
Let's get into this.
By fun, we might find out that we should never do this format again. But who knows? All right, so I'm thinking of titling it The New Colonialism, Power Data, and the Transformation of Human Experience. All right. What are we up against today? The question itself reveals the complexity of our current moment, a time when power operates through mechanisms far more subtle and pervasive than traditional forms of control. In the digital age, colonialism hasn't disappeared, it's been upgraded. Just as historical colonizers once claimed territories and resources, today's tech giants are colonizing something far more intimate, our lives captured in data. We are confronting a new form of colonialism, one that colonizes human experience through data extraction, algorithmic governance, and the systematic commodification of social interaction. Unlike previous historical moments of conquest, this colonialism operates through invisible infrastructures, algorithms, platforms, and sophisticated digital networks that reshape how we understand connection, knowledge, and social possibility.
Oh, man, good introduction. I watched an hour-long YouTube lecture on this, and that was intense. And I read the thing that you wrote me about the differences between classical Marxism, but that introduction was really good and succinct. So just a quick question. Do you mention the cafeteria thing, or can I say that now?
Oh, you can talk about cafeteria.
So one of the more interesting things in the lecture was, remember back when there were congressional hearings? I hope everyone remembers this, because Facebook, which then owned Instagram by that time, studies were coming out and all sorts of stories about how Instagram was really negatively impacting our young women, and especially in their formative years, because of the nature of algorithm, it was perpetually putting images in front of them that was creating body image and all sorts of other issues. So in the congressional hearings, this comes up, and it becomes clear that they're not going to do anything about it because they make money off of this business model. So they have no interest in adjusting it. But somebody uses an analogy, and this is one of the things like in Congress that drives me nuts. It's like when we have a budget shortfall or we're trying to raise the debt ceiling or something, inevitably people talk about, well, if I did this with my personal finances, like if I did this with my checkbook, you're like, yeah, the national economy doesn't work like your personal checkbook, right?
If only we had a mint and could print money.
Yeah, or collect taxes or whatever. But the reason that the analogies and the anecdotes don't work is because Congress isn't your kitchen table, right? Well, during this hearing, somebody used an analogy that said that these online platforms, they're basically the new school cafeteria. And I remember hearing that and lots of people sort of going, oh yeah, well, you have different groups and you choose which table you're going to sit at, and right, like, and all analogies have an upper limit where they cease to function in a helpful, clarifying way. But this one was wrong right from the start. And so in this presentation that I heard, the differences between the cafeteria and online platforms is so important to understand and for us not to think about it like the high school cafeteria. So just two of the examples of the difference that was absolutely profound to me. One is in the high school cafeteria, not only can I see you, you can see me. And Instagram is not that way. It is one directional. And when you add that to an algorithm, then the algorithm begins to show me in that one direction things that it thinks I want to see. So the relationship is not the same because the mutuality of you and I being in the same space together means that you can also see my reaction. Like if something shocking happens and I go, oh, I don't want to see any more of that. But an algorithm can't read that sort of thing, right? The other big difference is that in order for the cafeteria analogy to work, we have to be present at the same time. But in the online space, which is where we're headed, it doesn't work that way. So people can post something like from Australia and I see it in real time, like right now. That's not how cafeterias work. And so the fact that I can see atrocities in, say, Africa or in the Southern Hemisphere, or just the digital miles don't exist. And so I'm taking in both good and bad images and videos that I have no physical connection to, but they're brought to me in ever increasing speed through the algorithm, but in instantaneously. And so this is where the cafeteria analogy is actually, it's not just unhelpful. It really is avoiding the very problematic nature that this thing that you're going to present is trying to address.
Yeah, it's like, what if the two worst actors in every middle school cafeteria were put at the same table and given megaphones?
Yeah.
All right, so the second section, playing on a new form of colonialism, the digital frontier. Imagine a world where every click, every interaction, and moment of our digital experience becomes a resource to be extracted, processed, and monetized. This isn't a dystopian fantasy. It's the current reality of data colonialism, a sophisticated system of control that extends far beyond traditional notions of technological innovation. Tech corporations have created data territories that function as global power centers, transcending geographical and political boundaries, right? The ones that make the analogy with the cafeteria, similar point. Platforms like Google, Facebook, Amazon are not merely communication tools, but comprehensive systems of global governance that control unprecedented amounts of human interaction. And it's around 35 years old now that you have more interactions that are digitally mediated, that even with people than in-person interactions these days. Like once you graduate school, then that kind of comes online. The mechanism is both elegant and terrifying. Every human interaction becomes a point of data, a resource to be extracted, analyzed, monetized. This isn't just economic exploitation, it's a fundamental reimagining of human value, where our most intimate experiences are transformed into inputs for algorithmic systems. These newly constructed data territories function remarkably like colonial empires. They track, influence, and ultimately control vast swaths of human experience through sophisticated algorithms and ubiquitous platforms. The parallels with historical colonialism are not just metaphorical, they're structural. Just as colonial powers justified their actions through narratives of civilization and progress, today's tech companies frame their data extraction as convenient connection. The result, a new form of exploitation that transcends traditional geographic nation state boundaries.
It's an interesting way to frame it verbally by using the colonial language, because for most people that I've heard talk about, say, digital life and social media, they make it about the individual, that it's about its effect on me or even our connection to each other. To examine it from a larger structural analysis, it really, like, I love social media. I love my cell phone, right? And even though sometimes I know it can be detrimental to me, I think for the upside is easy to justify some of the negative. But to do this analysis of the larger structural level and how, and I think you're probably going to mention this coming up, how it impacts us as a society and how we relate to each other in groups or tribes. It's the first time that I've actually understood why people are so terrified about where we're going and about its impact on us in the present moment of not just our national, say, politics or societal situation, but globally.
Mm.
And I mean, it really was eye-opening to look at the analyzing this at a structural level, and you just realize, like, oh, this isn't just about its impact on me in a day. This is changing how we conceive of who's us and who's them and
Yeah.
how we interact with each other.
And the Nick Caldry, who gave the lecture I sent you, I just got his new book that just came out, and I'm like halfway through that. And this is that image he uses of digital space, where he kind of points out, as a sociologist, when we map kind of the story and transformations of civilization, there's this relationship between technology, the modes of communication, right? So from like the earliest moment for humans as a species, when we early on, we have 150 people that we interact with. That's the place where we get the first technology that really transforms us as a species. Fire. We outsource a lot of the work our stomach did to cooking, and a lot more energy goes into what is the frontal cortex, where symbolic communication and all these things happen. So as when Homo sapiens gets fire, the reorganization of how we use energy, we develop the cognitive capacity for symbolic interaction. 280,000 years ago ish, and that's in religion was born in that moment. The kind of shared experiences of effervescent trance, dance, these kinds of things. And though, and religion was also the first place we built any permanent structures, were religious ones. So this place in which our communication, as we built kind of bonds of social trust that bound people together, right? Like, and that's the root of religion, that kind of binding of people together. It happens there just with voice and movement, right? Then you get script, then you get text, then movable type, this kind of thing. And as you track like the modes of communication, you also get economic relations, because you need some forms of symbols to generate social trust as the people you relate to get bigger. you would not have democracies without literate people and the ability to vote. The notion of a self that's self-reflective and takes input and reasons, right? And so what he's trying to point out is like there are these our social space has been reworked through technology, social culture, or organization, and when we've done these, right, they get reorganized. It's feudalism. There's a kind of power that naturally emerges in it that ultimately undermines itself, gets critiques, birth of, say, nation states, empires, that kind of moves through the story. And it goes, the entire narrative around digital space, one that collapses all the distance and this kind of thing. Why do we think that we as a species, given the last time new space showed up, colonial projects, that we're going to be any different? And yet the narrative around it is as naive and positivist as like the church's narrative of finding a new world. Well, what if we were to take the recognition that this digital space of the ways we mediate relationships and stuff, what's going on there, and does it contribute to the functions that bring social trust, cooperation, or does it undermine it? What are the incentive structures for the people that built this, right? And this is part of what its critique is, that the incentive structures that nation states don't realize that another space has emerged that actually controls more of the interactions of people and has turned the individuals, the supposedly democratic subjects, not into like the clients of these platforms, but of the resource of them. They've been monetized. And so the next section is called the Forex model of digital conquest. These corporations follow what scholars describe as the Forex model: explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. They meticulously map our social interactions, extend their reach globally, extract maximum economic and strategic value, and systematically eliminate alternative social spaces and ways of being. Consider the scale. Platforms like Facebook have user bases larger than the populations of most countries. WhatsApp and YouTube connect billions, creating unprecedented networks of data extraction. This isn't just business, it's a form of global governance without traditional accountability, nor a social contract of reciprocal responsibility. In lieu of a Bill of Rights protecting the reach of state power, we consent to unread terms and conditions that protect the platform while it monetizes our attention. They meticulously map social interactions, extend their global reach, extract value, and systematically eliminate social spaces and ways of being. At its core, data colonialism represents a fundamental reshaping of power dynamics. Instead of claiming physical land or natural resources, these digital colonizers appropriate human life itself through the continuous extraction of personal data. Every search, like, share, and interaction becomes a resource to be analyzed, predicted, and monetized. The power dynamics are profoundly asymmetrical. Platforms can see everything users do, while users remain largely blind to the complex mechanisms of data processing. Your most intimate moments, preferences, and behaviors become inputs in massive algorithmic systems designed to maximize corporate profits. The asymmetry doesn't stop at surveillance. They don't merely observe behavior, they actively shape it through hyper-nudging, continuously influencing our needs, desires, and choices. This is just one example how the control society no longer relies on the external threat of force alone, because the mechanism of control has been internalized.
Holy guacamole. All right, 3 quick things. I read a book many, many years ago called The Transparent Society. And one of the things in that book was, I think it was the opening story, was that in cities like Cincinnati, Ohio, that they had instituted surveillance cameras and crime was way down. And so people willingly sacrificed, this was like one of the theories of the book, sacrificed their privacy in exchange for their safety. And so that was one of the concerns of the book. But this is actually more interesting, as interesting as that conversation is, because this is exchanging, giving up your privacy, but not even guaranteeing your safety, right? This is willingly participating for whether it's connection, entertainment, mindless scrolling, Pinterest boards, whatever it is, but we willingly give up all of our data knowing that it is being harvested and monetized. It's like one of my favorite sayings somebody introduced me to is, if you don't pay for something, you're the product.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the second thing I think
unless it's a public utility, right? Which is one of the models of addressing this, to keep the kind of connection without the incentive structure. The colonial structure is you make it a public utility where it's responsible to the common good, not the shareholders of the corporations.
Wow. Okay.
But I haven't got to that chapter in his new book yet, but
Okay.
I skipped ahead to be like, well,
the second thing I think it's really important to say is, when we talk about incentive and motive, that's sort of the hinge on which this way of thinking turns. Because for many of us who don't think about such things at deep level, we probably think that some of the negative side effects are a bug, not a feature. They're just right. They're an unintended consequence. And while it is unfortunate, for instance, like if in the formation of our young daughters and nieces, that we know it's what it's doing to their brains, right, and their self-image, and we think, well, that's unfortunate, but there are ways around it, like filters or parental things and all sorts of stuff, like limitations on screen time and whatever. But this way of thinking, it's really important to go, no. It's not an unintended consequence. It's not a bug. This is a feature. And if you look at, like, for instance, Facebook, look at its original DNA. It was designed by men to evaluate the physical attractiveness of women based on their faces, right? That's the Facebook.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like, that desire to do that is part of our biological inheritance that we have come to find helpful ways of orienting in positive directions through social relations, right? So something like marriage, something like equal rights amendments, something like social shame for people that act like horn dogs. There are all these ways that as a society we go. Part of our biological inheritance leads men until their testosterone drop, and some of them forever, just to have to deal with the fact that they have desires that might not lead to flourishing respect and mutuality. That you could even say, like, one crescendo would be like, don't just not have sex with your neighbor's partner. Like, why don't you learn to look at them not as an object but as a subject? You've heard it said that, but there's this other way you could say it. Like, don't make them an object. And this is like, well, what happens if we know dudes like to turn chicks into objects and we let them do it all the time, where they don't even have to see the face of the person and that person experience them objectifying them. And then we know that's in there, so we can just show it to them even if they don't want it and they can't opt out. Like the number of people who are like, why does my algorithm keep putting 28-year-olds with perky breasts in my feed?
Yeah.
And your algorithm's like, yeah, we know what you want. We've saw you slow your scroll down. And so we're not going to ask you whether you want us to encourage, basically telling like the opposite of Jesus. You've heard it said, don't have sex with your neighbor's wife. But I say unto you, if we encourage her to put saucy pics on her IG, you can stare at them all you want. That's just like one example. Then those desires, possessions, acquiring wealth, social status, all those things, it puts it on steroids. They go back to the analogy you gave at the beginning of the cafeteria, right? Why there are randos doing stuff in the cafeteria is to get a laugh and attention and social praise from their peers. Yeah. And the teachers are like, come on, we got to learn how to be social here. You can't do this when you're at a job. Like, you're learning to be mature and tame these natural instincts and learn how to relate socially. This is just like, nah, what if it's Lord of the Flies all the time? And we make money off you getting to do it.
Yeah, I think so. That's the part I think is really tough to accept is that it's not just objectifying, right? That's level one. It's that then gets monetized for someone else's benefit. And you don't want to be sinister or attribute negativity all the time, but these people who are studying these things, they keep telling us, like, I keep going back to this DNA analogy. Like Uber, if you look at why it started, it was because people who were out partying and didn't want to drive, but they also didn't want to compete for taxis. And so this thing was created, but there was a lawsuit a couple years ago about not only Uber drivers getting the short end of the stick, but also then behaving badly. And so this stuff it's not an unfortunate consequence down the road. It's actually built in from day one in most of these circumstances. And I think for me, it's hard to be, it feels like, being a negative Nelson and looking at the downside of everything. But the reality is, if you look at our politics, if you look at our social structures, if you look even at our globe, our world right now, the way that we are relating to each other is being transformed by these digital spaces.
Or just the line of billionaires sitting behind the president at the inauguration, right?
That was a moment, wasn't it? That was a very colonial moment when the heads of, say, the Hudson Bay Trading Company, right, for furs, were behind. That was quite a moment of the commercial lords, if you want to call them that, chieftains, being actually brought. So the economy came into governmental in this spectacle. That was a really weird moment. Hey, one thing before you start reading again. This is my last thing. Did you say the number 280,000 years ago?
I think so.
I've never heard that number before. What's that number?
Oh, like that's kind of like the earliest evidence that we have of kind of symbolic, artifacts. Like
Really?
So as a species, we're relating that way. The first permanent structures we know of were where before you had agriculture, you would move around.
Yeah.
But then the first permanent structures were places you gathered for religious events.
Huh.
So
that's so interesting. Because I read the book, The 10,000 Year Leap, I think it was called. That was one of the more interesting reads I've ever had. But I don't know that I've ever heard the number 280,000 years. So that really caught my ear in an interesting way.
Well, I think that's the correct number. I read this book called The Evolution of Religion that recently. I think that's what book it was in. Anyway, Robin Dunbar's book on the development of religion, who's the guy that also did the big research on friendship, where you have like the 150 number is like human beings don't really have more than 150 relationships that are intimate, and this is the period where we developed it, namely when more of our the energy used in our body went into cognitive ability versus we had more access to energy for cognitive stuff when we have fire and outsource a lot of the energy that used to take place to process food. We cook it. So
that's fascinating. All right. So hopefully everybody is still with us, because you're only like 2 or 3 paragraphs in, but I know I haven't even looked at your essay yet, but I know there's a turn coming. There's a moment where you upscale it and it becomes even more problematic.
All right. So the next section is called a new colonial class. This system was birthed has birthed a new colonial class, not of traditional landowners, but of data scientists, corporate execs, and entrepreneurs who control the means of data extraction and processing. Oddly enough, this is not in it. This is a whole nother reason to freak out that the richest man in the world has access to all of our citizens' data, given just how ethical he tends to be. It would be hard to turn down a data set that makes you more powerful than all your competitors. Anyway, luckily he's putting like high quality human beings that are thrilled racism is back on the menu in charge of it. Anyway, significantly, this class, the new colonial class, often inherits the racial and gender biases of historical colonial elites, perpetuating systemic inequalities in a digital format. The global South continues to be disproportionately impacted. Big tech corps, primarily based in the U.S., extract massive amounts of data from developing regions, mirroring historical patterns of economic exploitation, and yet by the assumption of more and more people's lives into the system, it extends the horizon of colonization through the digital space. Philosopher Akili Mimimbe, I don't know if I pronounced this right, African post-colonial philosopher, describes this as the becoming black of the world, where he's using black here like James Cone, a process where human complexity is reduced to coded data points, stripping away context, nuance, and individual agency. Data colonialism isn't just an economic phenomenon, it's fundamentally transforming our understanding of knowledge itself. AI and big data are actively redefining what counts as legitimate information, favoring institutionally driven top-down approaches that often dismiss individual and local knowledge. Right, and this is the attack on alternative forms of knowing is an essential part of colonialism. Right, think of like world mapping, and there's a whole set of post-colonial research on this. Said talks about it quite a bit. This represents more than economic extraction. It's a fundamental redefinition of knowledge itself. Artificial intelligence and big data actively determine what counts as legitimate information, prioritizing institutional perspectives while dismissing individual and local knowledge systems.
Wow, man. That is fascinating. I don't think it's the same
it's
thing.
It's creeping me out. This is why I sent you this, is because I was like, this makes way too much sense. It's making me really uncomfortable. And I was hoping someone was going to talk me down. And all three people I sent this to were like, yeah, this is like giving a framework for like eerie feels, you know?
Yeah. You know, I know it's not the same, but what the pattern that you just laid out, what it makes me think of is there's a great book by Benjamin Barber, I think his name is, called Jihad versus McWorld. And
we all need to go back and watch the Barry Taylor story about Bo mentioning this. This is a complete aside, but when Barry Taylor was last on the podcast, there's a story about this book that is just funny, and it's just worth going back to watch. The video is even funnier because of Barry and Bo's faces. Anyway, sorry. Jihad and McWorld, Bo.
So one of the theories in the book that has just stuck with me over all these years is that McWorld, which is sort of what we're talking about, right? But if you think about it, like, let's go with the music industry, right? Well, when a band like Mumford & Son comes out, right, that's sort of a local expression. That is really specific sound that emerges out of a place. Or you could do it with grunge out of Seattle, or, you know, the Beatles out of Liverpool. But once it comes into McWorld, then in studios like in Nashville, they will try and recreate that sound. And sometimes they'll actually create bands to sound like that. So they take an authentic, emergent expression, and they monetize it, and then they try and replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
But then it becomes replicated so much, right, that we would call it like simulacra, that it's tough to recognize the original because the Xerox has been made so many times.
And then they write worship songs in that style.
Exactly. Yes. Right. But the problem is that McWorld is always looking for the next local expression. And it actually needs that because after a while, you know, if you're listening to your favorite radio station or your favorite Spotify playlist and all the songs start to sound the same, eventually you will want some variety. So they have to go and look for the next sound, the next cool thing, right? Because they have to sell you something, right? McWorld requires it. So the interesting thing is that these two things, though, live in a symbiotic relationship where if you, let's say you in North Carolina, you start a funky band that has a unique sound, but you guys want to get big. You hope to get signed by a label, right? And the label is out, you know, listening at local bars for the next unique sound. And so it's a symbiotic relationship where you willingly give that sound and that performance in exchange for money and fame. And then the cycle continues. So that's the same sort of pattern that our participation in these social spaces, we willingly participate for the benefit that we get, and we are more than eager to sacrifice. But what's the machine getting out of it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is making the whole thing more disturbing. All right, so the next section is called the erosion of autonomy. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of this new colonialism is its continuous erosion of individual autonomy. Through what's often called hyper-nudging, platforms constantly influence our needs, desires, and choices. The boundary between human experience and economic extraction becomes increasingly blurred. Platforms are restructuring social imagination, creating curated, algorithmically managed experiences that reduce complex human relationships to engagement metrics. The result is increasing social isolation, occurring paradoxically within systems that claim to connect us. Social interactions are no longer organic, they're carefully curated inputs designed to generate more data. The myth of us, promoted by social media platforms, create an illusion of connection while simultaneously gathering unprecedented amounts of personal information. Alternative spaces for solidarity are systematically relativized, marginalized, and colonized by the logic of data extraction. Like the McWorld example is great, right? I mean, that's an aesthetic thing. Like a particular scene then becomes a global market. Social interactions are no longer organic. They're carefully curated inputs designed to generate more data. Among data colonialism's most insipid and ignored maneuvers is its expansion of the colonized class. Data extraction, the lack of control over one's own data and content, and the reshaping of social relations effectively turn an increasing number of people into colonial subjects. Our data is used in ways few anticipate or explicitly consent to, for things such as targeted advertising or profiling. Our social interactions are transformed into potential market relations through data, generating capitalist profits just for interacting on the platform. The human, then, is no longer a subject, but a commodity.
So, oh man, this is getting deep. So, in colonialism, which, by the way, I wrote a book with my mentor Randy Woodley called Decolonizing Evangelicalism. Even if you don't care about evangelicalism per se, the introductory
It
stuff
cares about you, Bo.
the introductory stuff that Randy says in the book. So it's a conversation between Randy and I. The stuff that Randy says about early colonialism is so vital to understand, because this claim that you're making, when land, resources, and humans are commodified, now you're saying data, there is a power structure at place behind that has to be examined and dismantled.
Which is why this is creeping me out, right? So think of movements of solidarity. Think of ways you would think about resisting or even opting out of this social space that comes with a closer connection to a closer connection to the acquisition of wealth than anything that involves nation states and subjects with influence in some marginal sense, right? Like this, the moment you recognize the digital space as a space, and that space is the place in which more and more people interact, then we got problems,
So we need to stop conceiving of it as a virtual space and actually conceive of it as a legitimate space and think about it and analyze it and participate in it, right? Not as an exception, but as a rule. Because if we continue to think about virtual space as exceptional, then we don't take any of these concerns seriously. We don't give them the weight that they deserve. Oh, hold on. Somebody's talking about Willie Jennings. One of my friends is a huge Willie Jennings fan. So he says, Willie James Jennings, after whiteness and education and belonging, I think it's talking about three fragments: faith, commodity, and colonial. Okay. That's a good recommendation.
Yeah. My battery's dying, so I'm switching microphones for a second.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I went from 100% to 5%. And
wow. If you're not watching this, if you're listening to this on the podcast, if you're watching the live stream, you can tell that Tripp is not in his studio. He's back. He is on his back porch, and he was using a different computer configuration. And I'm glad you switched. I was going to have to tell you, your microphone got wonky for a second.
Look.
It's still wonky.
It's wonky?
Yeah. You have a lot of static now.
Is this better?
Way better. Way better.
Is this better?
Yeah.
All right. Good.
And I was just telling everybody who was listening later on the podcast what was going on, because if you're not watching it, you may not be able to picture the fact that you're outdoor and have a totally different camera angle than normal.
Well, now people can go check out the video. Which, by the way, if people aren't familiar with Willie Jennings, they should go check out our podcast interview. He's awesome. We talk about Christian animism for most of it.
Oh, interesting. Okay. By the way, if you definitely check out Willie Jennings, but I will also say that his work on the Book of Acts, for those who have engaged it, has been one of the most transformative things. I mean, it really does change the trajectory of people's entire life and ministry.
Yeah. All right, Bo, here we go. Next section, resistance and reimagination. As we confront this new reality, the challenge is clear. We must develop new forms of solidarity and resistance that can operate within the potentially dismantle these algorithmic power structures. And I kind of put 4 different kind of categories for thinking about this. One is kind of critical consciousness, where we need to understand data extraction mechanisms, recognize algorithmics, how they shape our perception, challenge technological neutrality narratives, which is kind of one of the bigger threats of keeping us in power. Second way is alternative infrastructures. So what would it look like to create platforms prioritizing human agency, develop decentralized networks, protect individual and collective privacy? Ethical frameworks is section 3. Establish guidelines for technology development, prioritize human complexity, and create accountability mechanisms. And At the global scale, thinking about global solidarity, foster cross-cultural resistance networks, share strategies across technological divides, and recognize the global nature of human colonialism.
After global solidarity, say the next phrase again.
So there's fostering cross-cultural resistance
There you
networks,
go.
share strategies across technological divides, because most of the relationships across divides are mediated and shaped by these algorithms. So, has that problem with it. And recognize the global nature of digital colonialism. The and I'll go ahead and read the conclusion. Our task is not merely technological, but profoundly human. We're called to reimagine solidarity in an algorithmically mediated world that constantly seeks to commodify and control human interaction. We're not passive recipients of technological transformation. We're active agents capable of reshaping these systems, creating alternative futures that prioritize human dignity over data extraction. The struggle against the reductive logic that seeks to transform human experience into extractable, monetizable data points. Our resistance is an affirmation of human complexity, a declaration that we are more than the sum of our digital interactions. In this moment of unprecedented technological transformation, solidarity becomes an act of radical reimagination, a collective effort to preserve our full, irreducible human potential. The colonizers have changed, but the fundamental dynamics of extraction and control remain disturbingly similar. The digital frontier is the new battleground for human rights, privacy, and collective autonomy. We're facing a paradigm shift, requiring a new approach to social theory and ethics. And the first step is understanding the system, recognizing that our digital lives are far from a neutral territory.
Wow. Wow, that is consequential. Hey, the amazing Jesse Turrier wants you to know that your microphone's buzzing. So I know that we're at an hour and 7, so we probably don't have that much more time, but I just wanted you to know, Tripp, if you could make an adjustment, you are still buzzing. It sounds like something's come loose in your microphone.
All right.
Like something's rattling.
Yeah,
just wanted you to know.
Is this better?
No, worse.
All right.
That's better. Yeah. We'll try that. Uh-oh. He froze up.
Is this better?
All right. He says, no, you're good now. Yay.
Okay.
Good job, man. That was impressive. Be able to fix that on the fly. Okay. So listen. One of the things, all right, only some people are hearing it. Okay. One of the things that I'm always very aware of because of my theological explorations and migration is the presence of purity tests. And so a lot of times somebody will, thinking that they're being clever, will pull out the cynical. Yeah, by the way, good job, Tripp, on that intro. People are enjoying the summary. This is no place for purity tests or total, a totalized expectation. Like, we're all at this point compromised at various levels. So somebody might come in and say, oh, isn't it ironic that you're talking about this, but on a digital platform that you're then going to promote on Facebook and your website and Google to try and get more views and listens, right? Yes, it's ironic. Like, that's not that clever of a critique. We're all embedded in this thing at this point, but it doesn't mean that we don't get to talk about it and try and reevaluate the role that we want to play and the role we want it to play in our lives and in our communities, right? So in my mind, there's no place for purity politics and idealism. At this point, the reality is we have all been affected and infected by this. So sometimes, like, you and I are thousands of miles apart right now, and thank goodness for technology being able to facilitate a conversation between us. But it doesn't mean that there's I, I'm not saying this well, but I just want to say, yes, it's ironic, and yes, we're part of the system, but there's still a place for analysis, because as this thing continues to grow, it's only going to get more impactful and more totalizing in both our generation and in the next.
Yeah, and I think like one of the things um to note is it's the power dynamics of the relations in the new digital space that's the problem, right? It's not that there is a digital space, but it's that we have a kind of naivete and positivism, and so it's unregulated and not structured for human flourishing, right? So um, not all nation states are created equal, right? So I lived in Scotland. There are ways in which Scotland um, regulates the economic relations of that particular state that you would much rather be poor in Scotland than be poor in a red state in America. Like when you just look at like overall well-being. So nation states were a space that emerged. A lot of them early on had um, different kinds of colonial ambitions, others not, right? So nation states unaware as to how the new political space relate generates a world war. It's just uh, in a sense the trenches at this point are digital, and um, much like World War One, um, at some point in it, the people dying in trenches on both sides um, realized that they were warriors in a war that wasn't about them, that they had more in common with those in the trench on the other side
Wow.
than the other, right? They go off to war thinking, oh, well, there's this heroic thing and blah, blah, blah. And then the number of stories of World War One um, combatants who go like, we're out here dying for something, but I don't know if we're really a part of it. But they went in with a very different picture. So, um, yeah, I don't think this is setting up a kind of in like, oh, we got to get rid of all technology. This is all bad. It's more of a going like, um, how when we showed up in the new world and scare quotes, what we were doing, and um, yeah, let's not do that in this space. But in part of calling it a new social space is is just a framing that then you have to ask ethical questions anew and do the kind of critical analysis that
Yeah.
has happened in previous points. And I think that um, as we look at the power of that space as it's ramping up, as it gets more energy and more data, and then we look at the results uh, in the social fabric of so many different um, communities, the breakdown in from between families, right, all the way to between nations, to then within nations and between them, like um, i- is this like, are these the terms we really want to have the majority of relations that people have in a day? Do we want them managing it? um
Mm.
and I don't know a lot of people that are going to say yes. Like, if you ask the question, to me the thing was just reading through a few of these philosophers and sociologists thinking about it, to go, um what what if the kind of the in a sense we've been preaching a gospel, the big tech companies preach a gospel of connection and harmony and these kinds of things, oh, being able to find your tribe and all this kind of stuff. And what if it's similar to just showing up and being like, look, would you like to have horses, guns, and a Bible? Yeah,
Yeah.
and we're going to borrow this. It's called land, because there's all the the positive narratives that legitimate the encounter with the other, and then there's the power structure that's seizing
Mm.
the territory, and then what happens to the subjects of that territory. Um,
Yeah.
and Edward Seed in talks about this concept of world mapping, where he tells the story of like a British colonialist trying to make a map, literally, right, of the colonial territories in India. But like, how do you make the map of it? You get like an indigenous person to give you the tour. Like, here's what's going on, here's where this is, or whatever. By the time you get done, the the map has actually been drawn by the colonizer and named, right?
Mm.
And then, if you want to exist in this colonial world, you now have to relate to that web of relations on the terms of the map of the powerful. And so, how many of our relations have been put in a map by big data and told that this is how we relate, this is how we connect. Oh, we're friends, I like this, you know and it's but that's not the only way we can relate, and
Yeah.
it's not the only way you can relate in this space. And so, kind of raising to the fore that the digital space is colonizing human subjectivity, increasing surveillance and control, and in doing so, with with an incentive structure to break down solidarity.
Mm.
Then, what exactly are we giving ourselves to? Like, we think, oh well, there are all these new threads of connection that bring people together. And I think what the different thinkers that kind of were being engaged there are going like, well, what if they're not threads of connection, they're actually chains? And
Mm.
is that really is
Wow.
that really what we want to do?
My friend Dave Stamba in the comment section over here talked about from my father. He learned about the paradigm shift. And you know what's funny is a lot of times, like anything that makes its way into popular usage, it sort of loses some of its distinctiveness. I mean, that happened with all sorts of stuff that
Deconstruction.
deconstruction's my favorite example. Identity politics is another great example, but paradigm shift is a good third example. But the actual original work by Thomas Kuhn, I think is how you say his name, um, this is a paradigm shift, not the way we talk about it, like, in corporate America, but the actual way that he intended it. This is requires a different paradigm to think about this in a different way. Joshua Patterson says it's like critiquing a tradition from within. That's a really good caution. Yeah.
Yeah, which is uh, um, that that a tradition critiquing a tradition from within the uh, is the image that Gadamer uses for thinking about deconstruction, right? That a tradition is both like a dignity and a disaster. It creates a kind of symbolic web of reflection and reference points and stuff. But every enactment of a tradition is a new expression of it. And so you have to actually decide what you're conserving and then what you're transforming. But one of the gifts of a tradition is there's actually a framework for
Mm,
raising questions. But you within a tradition, you raise questions one at a time, right? When
yeah.
you set aside an entire tradition, it generates like the lack of symbolic power and structure for even analyzing uh, or doing something new. And one of the places you can even see that are, think of those whose experience of their faith deconstruction is one where then they don't have uh like, if let's say you grew up in a really fundamentalist evangelicalism and you're like, oh, peace, I'm out. um Individuals in that space, like, having been their clergy, is like, well, I don't know, like, I have no answers at this point, right? Because the whole tradition is just vile to me. And um and and part of what I think Gadamer offers is to go like, you're in a tradition, and
So you don't have to just go set the whole thing aside, like think within it for its own benefit in the future. uh, Not that you can't set something all aside, it's just it creates a whole new structure where what are my reference points, what are the assumptions, what are the givens, what are the ways of logic and reason in it, right? And
Yeah.
some deconstruct because they are like, well, it would be nice if Jesus had some content related to the tradition in his name, and others are like, bump
Mm,
this, I'm out, now what do I do, you know? So
yeah. So I'm working on an essay right now, or an article, about how democracy, our politics, is socially constructed. And so in the introduction, I walk through a whole bunch of things that almost everyone, when they think about it, will agree is socially constructed. So, like the economy, right? Our use of money, that is socially constructed. And so when we say this, we mean that the power of something is in our participation. As we participate in the economy, it gives it legitimacy, right? But it is socially constructed. A dollar isn't inherently worth anything except in the way that we participate in it, conceive of it, and participate in it, right? State lines are socially constructed. Like, the straight line at the bottom of Oregon, it doesn't actually exist. It Right? It only exists to the degree that we give it authority by participating in it, right? But it's a social imaginary, right? We've constructed the state lines. On planet Earth, there are no straight lines. Race gets talked about as powers and participation. Yeah. So race, it gets talked about as, because biologically, right? There is no difference at the cellular level, right? That you can point to for race. Now, ethnicity we can talk about, and skin color, right? In the epidural layer, we can talk about that stuff. But there is no such thing as race, except that we participate in it, and thus we legitimate it. Okay, I, denominations are socially constructed. Like Methodism is socially constructed. The Constitution was socially constructed, right? Our canon was socially constructed. But I use all those examples to say that our politics is also socially constructed. It has power in the way we conceptualize of we the people and participate in it. But if we don't recognize that it's socially constructed, that it's a social imaginary, we think it has a power all of its own. So I just want to say, this is sort of my closing bid here. I would love to talk about that next time in a future episode. But what you're talking about in this space, this digital space, is that the way we conceive of it or conceptualize it as a social imaginary and participate in it in concrete behaviors, practices, is what gives it power.
yeah, yeah, and it kind of makes a when it goes to the digital space, there are kind of two moments I think a lot of people are familiar with as to how it's the role digital space plays in our lives jump dramatically. um Generationally, think of how many people, because they want to see pictures of their grandkids, got on social media,
Yeah.
right? And that is a genuine desire for a real connection with real people,
Yeah.
but the way our economic system is structured, people, um, especially adults and with young kids, are going to move a lot. So, for most of human history, the intergenerational families were all near each other. Now that's not the case. Oh, but
Hmm.
don't you want to see pictures of your kids? Don't you want to FaceTime with them? Don't you want to this? Right. So it is giving a connection. It's just what is the actual motive, or
Hmm.
who who is taking the data of that relation to then shape you.
Yeah.
Another big moment most people will be aware of, right, is what happened in COVID. It moved so many relations into this digital space, and um, it. it made ease and comfort meant, well, let's move even more of our relations within work, with family and friends, into a digital space. Those spaces during lockdown, all these terms of agreements that came up involved, like, oh well, yeah, well, Zoom, for example. Oh, we're going to use all the data in here, atomized, of course, so it's not about you personally, um, as input into our AI, right?
Hmm.
And in fact, we'll help you out. Like, you can just click this button, and AI is going to listen to your whole conversation and send you notes about it. So the like the ease of connection, the saving of time, and all these kinds of things, those could be really positive things. It's just the incentive structure and the people the people that own that space, their ultimate allegiance is to their shareholders, which involves increasing market space, power, capitalization, and right, um, battling with each other. Right, we don't need new startups in this space. We got a few of them, and they're behind the president. You want to own the market and own the space, right? So I I think just kind of noticing that, we can see both more of our lives became part of the digital space, and um, do, should it be something that's managed ethically, like the commons,
Hmm.
or with or a state-owned industry of sorts, but this would, I guess, be a transnational one, but like something where its responsibility is to the community whose lives are being brought up into this space, or is the duty to
Hmm.
um, the people who all that data is being used to market to. Um, and if it was just advertising, that's even a different thing. I mean, which is problematic on its own. But now there's with AI coming on, and the power of it, the the power of digital surveillance for both military things, for uh,
Hmm.
and the desire to own that space going forward, makes even alternatives problematic, right? So Facebook just buys competitors. Oh, we don't want China to own the digital space. We want an American company to do it. Anyway, so yeah, I think that there are definitely connections between that, what you were talking about there, Bo.
Yeah.
But that's also why it doesn't have to be this way, right?
Right.
Like, you don't have to have a democracy that says all men are created equal and only let a few of them vote. You could do it different. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Tripp, I thank you for introducing us to this. I really didn't know what you were sending me, and I had no expectation that it would be this profound. So I look forward to when you put up that little summary that you read, and to see people's feedback. And I just want to say personally, thank you to Lori and Jesse and Joshua and my friend Dave. This has been great to get the feedback in real time, and I just really appreciate people engaging in these conversations.
Oh yeah. Fun time. And but I have to say, it's hard to enjoy a conversation as much as I enjoy one with you, but on the porch with cigars, it just is like a whole new level. Now, if you were here and we were on the
Oh,
porch, um, that would be that would be that'd be something.
hey, here's a book recommendation: Terraform, Building a Better World by Propaganda. I guess that's the author, but probably a collective, I'm assuming.
No,
Um,
I think it's propaganda, like the rapper and political commentator. Like, building a better world by who? Oh, propaganda. Like,
well, anyway, I'm gonna check it out, and I'll write you a book report, Joshua.
all right. This has been fun, everybody.
Yeah.
We will